The Stillman Fire Protection District Chief says prevention is the most important when it comes to dealing with hazardous materials. WYFR reporter Alyssa Kelly learns more on what to do when dealing with hazardous materials following a hazmat situation at Rock Valley College over the weekend.
Yeah, Sydney, Chief Chad Hopeful with the Stillman Fire Protection District says it's important people follow manufacturer recommendations for chemicals in their homes. He says it is recommended for anyone who comes in contact with or finds hazardous material to leave it be. People should contact the fire department if they find themselves in a situation like this one. Departments have different tools they can use to identify what the subject is, but Hopeful adds they will most likely take information from the person who finds it. This allows firefighters to make the best decision based on what the material is.
It's not an emergency unless, somebody's cleaning out underneath their kitchen sink and they find something that's unlabeled and they're unsure. Obviously, that's not going to be an emergency. If they have any situations where they have some type of a product that's off-gassing or that's leaking, that's causing some type of a toxic damage, those might be more of those situations that would be of emergent situation.
Hopeful says the fire service deals with hazardous materials frequently. If you think about it, anytime a fire happens, it often ends up labeled hazardous materials because of plastics and petroleum products involved.
Hopeful adds a lot of materials are hazardous when you mix them, like cleaning chemicals. This can lead to problems like respiratory issues. It is important to follow manufacturer recommendations.